Lebanese Ether, Freestyle Drive. What's going on, everybody? Another
Hey,
Freestyle Drive Zoom edition. I had to do it because I got a very special guest with me who's going to discuss what's going on in Colombia and in South America in general. I got my man Eric from Red Condor Collective. What's going on, my brother?
so much, my man. So much going on everywhere we look, right? Whether it's right here in the United States, in the belly of the beast, or the motherlands, and Colombia and Palestina, right? All over the world. Um, there's a lot happening right now. So I appreciate having the time with you right now to speak about everything that's going on. There's so much.
Definitely, man. Thank you for being on the show. I've been following your page, Palante Visuals, Palante Siempre is your IG page, and Red Condor Collective. You've been doing amazing work by bringing awareness to what's going on in Colombia, and as well as connecting it with Palestine and building a solidarity movement in Milwaukee. Is that where you're based, from my understanding?
Yes, sir. Yes, I'm Milwaukee based. I'm out of town right now visiting family,
Okay.
but I am Milwaukee based. Been living there for a good 7 years. So much love to all my people in Milwaukee. Shout outs to the People's Revolution. Mad love to all my folks in Milwaukee. Shout out Student for Justice in Palestine. Everyone,
So,
you already know what it is.
excellent. Yeah, man. I mean, while we were setting up this interview, so much has happened within the last week. The assassination of the president of Haiti, the protests in Cuba, and the right wing here trying to exploit what's going on the ground. But I really want to discuss with you Colombia, because I feel like we don't hear enough about the protests in Colombia. And I'm sure there's lots of reasons why we don't. Maybe it doesn't fit a certain narrative, but that's why I'm having you on today. What is going on in Colombia? I know there was protests on the ground not too long ago. I'm not sure if they're still continuing as of now, but can you discuss that a little bit?
Thank you for asking, brother. So the situation in Colombia is ever since April 28th, there has been a paro nacional, a national strike, countrywide strike, reflected in all social sectors, all industrial sectors, all types of different communities are mobilized and activated and moving. And it has not stopped since April 28th. It has been an ongoing struggle. It has not stopped in over 2 months. The struggle has evolved and continued to develop. And all this time, the Colombian government has responded with massive state repression, massive violence, right? What amounts to crimes against humanity, right? International violations of international law and domestic law, all the while receiving support from the United States government and other imperial powers to do so, right? Including, Canada, UK, Israel, right? It's not just the United States, but the US is one of the big players here in supporting the Colombian government in its repressive tactics to try to halt the national strike, which has not stopped, right? So we say, el paro no para, el paro sigue. Stop. The strike keeps on going, right? So we have an ongoing struggle ever since April 28th, all across the country, reflected in all social sectors. And yeah, you're right. A lot of people have it's kind of like been out of a lot of people's attention, but it never stopped, right? And especially in the United States, one of the main reasons you don't hear about it as much is because of the US role in the crisis, right? It's like you can't denounce the Colombian state violence without denouncing the US involvement in the state violence. And it hasn't been necessarily like US just all of a sudden getting involved. It's a long pattern, a long history of intervention. So yeah, it's you don't hear about it as much in the States because then it comes with a critique of the US government, including the Democrats.
The both parties' role in supporting this repression and supporting the Colombian government. It doesn't seem convenient. Like I heard about the protests in Colombia through people like you, through other people online who are speaking out and showing what's going on in the streets, with the protests. And it's a general strike, you would call it. Is that a fair term to use?
Yes, general strike is a paro nacional, national strike. General strike is also that's also a totally legitimate term because, like I said, it's not just one sector of industry or one sector of social society. It is a generalized, wide, broad-based national strike, which is ongoing to this day.
It's very interesting because, again, why we don't hear about it, we see this protest going on in Cuba and all the right-wing media is like, Biden hasn't said anything yet. Harris hasn't said anything yet. They want them to condemn the Cuban government and speak out in support of the protest within seconds of it happening. They're obviously using it to cater to their Republican-based Cuban Americans who may support the Republican Party historically, and to condemn socialism, et cetera. But then they won't say anything, for example, with the repression in Colombia, which is the general strike. This is huge that's going on. And same thing with Venezuela. They'll speak out every day about what's going on there and how horrible the situation is. But when it comes to their allies, whether it's Colombia, whether it's Saudi Arabia, whether it's Israel, they don't say a word about it.
Right.
You're a Colombian American, from my understanding.
Yes. I am a U.S. citizen. I was born in the United States, but half of my family is Colombian. My mother's Colombian. So I still have a bunch of family living there. I still go back to visit. I still, haven't been in a while, but I hope to go back soon. Of course, given the COVID situation, it is difficult. But yes, I have a lot of direct family ties. A lot of my friends that I grew up with are still living back there. And of course, we have a lot of ties to organizations on the ground. And even if I wasn't, it's still important for all people to feel concerned about this situation, whether or not you're directly connected to it or not. But yes, in my case, I do have that connection through my family.
What sparked this strike? What sparked this national uprising from all different sectors in Colombia? I'm assuming students, labor, farmers. From what you're telling me, it sounds like all sectors are participating because of the tide of the situation. Obviously, was there something that specifically sparked this?
Yes, sir. So this is the result of mounting decades of repression, violence, inequality, lack of opportunity, assassinations and disappearances, right? So it's not necessarily a new phenomenon. However, it was sparked by the proposal of a reforma tributaria, a tax reform, right? Which was an austerity policy under the guise of fixing the economy after the Corona lockdown period. However, the proposal for fixing the economy was basically to squeeze tax money out of the poor and working and middle classes of Colombia, right? Rather than taxing the multinationals or the upper class, right? Their proposal for fixing the economy was to bleed dry the people who are struggling the most, right?
On the back of the workers and the poor, yes.
Exactly. So the people said, "Ya basta, no more. That's enough. We're tired of it, right? We've been tired of it. We've been mobilizing, right?" And there's also a history of this last 2 years of rolling national strikes, either on like a weekly basis, a monthly basis, or on and off kind of thing. So people have been mobilized for a while to do this type of action, right? And also in the last few years, there's been a lot of mobilizations around police murders of protest leaders, of activists, right? And it's kind of coming on the back of this, over 50 years of repression, and even more recently, since the Uribe government began, 6,402 disappearances of social movement leaders, right, across several presidencies, but it's been all under this same political party started by Uribe, right? So in Colombia, you have a context of this boiling, right, this boiling up of people responding to the repression, violence, inequality, lack of opportunity, exploitation, right? And it just kind of like exploded with the proposal for the reforma tributaria. People said, no way, we're going to stop it by all means necessary. So that's how we arrive in this current situation of the paro nacional, which has been ongoing since April 28th.
I mean, we've seen this happening not only in Colombia, but throughout the world, where the government tries to increase some tax that sounds very little, sounds very minor, but it leads to this huge uprising, which happened in Lebanon as well, where my family's from. You know, they want to tax WhatsApp messages or whatever, you know, and then people laughed at it, like, you know, people laughed at like who cares, you know, like you're fighting over WhatsApp messages, but that wasn't it. That was like the last straw that kind of broke the camel's back. It was like a way to extract money from poor and working people on an app that they used to communicate for free, and now the state is trying to get its hands on it and extract 5 cents per message. Just an example, you know, that they were trying to do that, and that led to this huge mobilization in the country where people were like, enough is enough. It was obviously a buildup of things going on. It wasn't that wasn't the only reason, but that was like, people got sick and tired of it. Economically, they're struggling. So any increase, any little tax is unacceptable at this point, especially if it's not being used to for anything useful that the people could see with their own eyes, when they feel like it's being used to austerity reasons, to cover the government's debts, or to go upwards towards the wealthy instead of downwards towards those who need it, you know? So it's interesting that these things are happening worldwide. Obviously, the pandemic exacerbated so much of the strain. What has been besides the repression, what has been the Colombian government's response to the people's demands?
So one good thing, first of all, yeah, thank you for sharing that, right? I wasn't as aware about the situation in Lebanon. And yeah, I laughed for a second at the beginning because it's just so absurd to even propose.
Exactly. I wasn't
a WhatsApp.
Yeah. And I wasn't talking about you. I wasn't talking about you per
sure.
se. Yeah, it just happened at the same time. But you know, people in the West who are like mocking the situation in Lebanon, like, well, you guys are complaining about the WhatsApp tax, like how silly and petty are you? But that's not what it's really about. That's what I was trying to say.
For sure. Yeah, for sure. I mean, it's such an absurd idea to even try to tax a WhatsApp message. So yeah, in Colombia, some of the responses as a result of the Paro Nacional has been the complete shooting down of the Reforma Tributaria, the tax reform, right? The individual who proposed it had to step down from his position in government. A lot of pressure. And now something to watch out for a lot of folks. There's been a new proposed Reforma Tributaria that a lot of people are concerned that they're going to try to like slip it through real quick and be like, oh no, this is the good one, right? So there has been like policy changes or policy issues that have shifted as a result of the mounting pressure. But for the most part, the Colombian government, you know, is very right wing. It digs its heels against any sort of resistance for change, right? So yeah, you do love to see it when there's a win, like even if it's just as simple as shutting down this one legislation, and then it provides some room to continue to get more changes.
It gives the people momentum. Like we can make change as long as we continue this strike, this protest, speaking out, etc. You know, why? And I know that obviously the Colombian state feels empowered by being backed by the #1 superpower, #1 imperialist country, the United States. Why is the U.S. so involved in Colombia? Why are they so supportive of the government there throughout the decades?
Thank you for asking. So just like a lot of our countries that suffer under imperialism and intervention, you know, we are a resource wealthy nation. Colombia is a resource wealthy nation. Colombia is considered to be politically strategic geographically. You know, folks can read into it. It's a long story, but folks can read into like the history around the Panama Canal, right?
Wow. So
that is a huge part of it.
Not even due to the Venezuela border, even due to the Panama Canal, there's reasons why.
Yeah, and I mean, that's even older, right? The Panama Canal is an older history of U.S. intervention, right? And it's a part of the role of like regional hegemony. And also just because like the Colombian government has been conservative for a long time. So they've been receptive, the government at least, and the ruling class has been receptive to this sort of intervention because it falls in their favor, right? And then, you know, since the late 90s, there's been the relationship with Venezuela on the border. You know, for folks that don't know, Colombia and Venezuela share a border on the eastern side of Colombia, western side of Venezuela. There's a lot of conflicts along the border as of recently, in part due to U.S. intervention and meddling. Even outside of the U.S., there was going to be some sort of conflicts, but it's definitely exacerbated and complicated by U.S. intervention. And then, of course, there is like the question of the drug war, which has been used as an excuse for a long time to justify the intervention, right? So the United States finds itself politically in a situation where it's very convenient and practical for them to intervene in Colombia and to maintain a political presence in Colombia. It's been that way for a long time. But it's also important for folks to remember that this is a regional geopolitical strategy as well. It's not just limited to Colombia. A lot of times these operations that the US conducts are, you know, they do affect multiple countries at the same time. And that kind of like leads into what we've been seeing recently, right? I know there's a little transition, but
Yes.
you know, with the Haitian head of state being assassinated, it was confirmed that it was assassinated by US trained Colombian soldiers.
That's crazy.
Right?
Wow.
So in a lot of ways, Colombia becomes then a staging ground for these interventions in the region.
So they were
right?
like mercenaries, Colombian mercenaries, basically.
Yeah, some of them were unless I'm mistaken, right? I don't want to put out any wrong facts, but unless I'm mistaken, some of them were active military, some of them were former military.
Okay.
But the majority of them received US training. And again, that's an important point for folks to remember, that a lot of this violence that we see in Colombia is with the approval of the US government, with the funding of the US government, and often with US weapons, right? And I'm not only talking about the riot police, the national police, and the military. I'm also talking about paramilitary organizations and agents who operate outside of any sort of regulation or jurisdiction from the government. However, they are
within Colombia.
Yes, so they, you know, they don't operate under any sort of pretense of rule of law. However, they do have coverage from the police, from the government, to conduct their terror, which is almost always targeting social movement leaders, Afro-Colombians, indigenous Colombians, students, journalists, organizers, union leaders. It's one of the most dangerous places in the world to be a journalist, to be a union leader or a social movement leader, what we call the líderes sociales, social leaders. You know, in Colombia, líderes sociales get targeted, right? So it is a risky thing to put yourself out there, to show your face, to be in the streets, to be known as an organizer or a mobilizer, right? And part of it is because the US funds these groups, you know, which are either, you know, government or non-governmental agents, which are committing this violent repression that we see.
I mean, it's crazy that what you're saying is that we don't know about this, that it's dangerous, so dangerous to be a journalist. Like those who are involved in movement work may be familiar, but I'm talking about the general population, because it's not a convenient narrative, whereas these countries are bad, this country is good, you know? Like our allies could get away with doing anything, like, you know, Saudi Arabia killing Khashoggi, the journalist, for example, without repercussions. Obviously in Colombia, journalists disappearing, being killed. You know, I know, like it's like the US always has an excuse for being involved in Colombia. Maybe initially was the anti-communism, Cold War. We don't want the Cuban, Soviet influence in Colombia. Colombia is a ground to stop these nationalist and socialist movements happening throughout South America. Then it became the drug war. But like, now what's the excuse? You know, it's like you're still involved after all these years. There's no Soviet Union threat. There's, you know, it looks like drugs increase whenever the US gets involved in these countries, whether it's Afghanistan, Peru, Colombia. Like the drug war is a failure if it's actually, if that's what the goal is. And now what you're mentioning with Haiti, what it's like, I've seen people online, you know, well, you know, try to dismiss it because they don't like the politics of the Haitian president. Regardless of the politics of the Haitian president, this is a huge violation of Haiti's sovereignty to have mercenaries, former active military, Colombian, US backed, entering a whole other country and assassinating a president. do you have any idea what the interest may have been in doing that? I mean, there's things behind the scenes that we don't know about initially. Any idea why they use these Colombian mercenaries and not somebody else, for example?
I think it gives, for example, it gives the United States a little bit of distance away from the violent act itself, which kind of allows them to step in a position of like, okay, here we are to stabilize and support the Haitian government, right? Which now we see these calls from the Haitian oligarchy, right? The ruling class of Haiti, which is very right wing, and which has not been like in support of the protest movement in Haiti, right? We see the ruling class now requesting US intervention in Haiti for stability, right? Which is really just to maintain their class privilege and position, and to maintain this sort of this structure of inequality in Haiti, which the United States has always benefited from, which the United States has always reinforced, right? The United States, you know, even as recent as the Obama administration has been very hands-on in preventing a lot of social change from occurring in Haiti, which would free their people. So I think the use of Colombian military, you know, it's not an uncommon thing to happen. It's kind of like a Cold War type of tactic of using a third party to conduct these actions. And you could even compare it to like the attempted invasion of Venezuela that happened like a year ago through mercenaries. That was obviously a failure in Venezuela, right? So it's not uncommon for the states to be involved in these type of tactics, and it gives them just enough room to deny any sort of involvement. But people who have like a historical analysis of the situation or a political analysis of the situation know what's going on and know what is like likely to have happened. So yeah, it's so unfortunate to see how Colombia gets used in this capacity, even though the Colombian people, right, are struggling so hard and they're fighting for freedom and economic equality in their own country, but they see their resources being used in this sort of way. You know, another example is Marco Rubio, over like about a year ago as well, tried to stage an invasion of Venezuela through the Colombian border. And there were skirmishes with the Venezuelan military, and people died, you know, because of this U.S. meddling, right, in the region, which is nothing new. But in every time we see it, its face, it's ugly.
I mean, I could see them trying to justify or rationalize their involvement in the border with Venezuela to an extent, even though it's wrong. But to have 20-something mercenaries go, you know, fly over to Haiti and assassinate the head of state, it's like, it's just, it should be on a news discussed more. I'm saying this is a huge thing, and I know the U.S. has intervened in Haiti for decades. We overthrew the Aristide government. We've been involved in destabilizing Haiti for a long time, and Haiti already has its own problems that it's dealing with post-earthquake, that it doesn't need more instability. It's just, you know, is this drug related? Is it, you know, like what hands are involved? You know, which elites are fighting each other over Haiti? Like, you know, some of these things may come out later on when information gets leaked and you know, people reveal things in the future. But it was shocking to hear that there were 20-something Colombian, you know, mercenaries or soldiers involved in this, because they ain't just, it wasn't like a skirmish on their own border with another country. They went to another country and assassinated the goddamn president, you know? So, and nothing's gonna happen to them, as far as, probably nothing's gonna happen. It will probably be no consequences unless somebody takes the fall for it, for example. Has a situation in Venezuela, I know, you know, due to the economic situation being very bad, has led to a lot of Venezuelans going to Colombia for work, for stability, for shelter, for whatever it may be. Has that put a strain on Colombia? What is the Colombia's response? What is the state's response to Venezuelans trying to enter the country, you know, through the border?
I would say there's probably been different responses at different times. Sometimes there's been efforts to help people kind of settle, and sometimes there's been a lot of animosity towards Venezuelans. And it's also important for people outside of Colombia to also know we have our own internal displacement refugee crisis, right? It's one of the biggest internally displaced populations in the world, right? Definitely in this hemisphere, in the Western hemisphere, biggest internally displaced population is within Colombia due to the armed conflict and all the struggles that we've seen over 50
Colombian
years.
refugees within Colombia.
Within Colombia as well, right? So the whole country is really strained, right? And obviously the resources are not being allocated to fit the needs of the people. So it's hard to say like if there was only one particular response to the insurge of Venezuelans coming in, because at times it's been good and at times it has not been as welcoming. So it's a difficult situation.
I mean, obviously, you know, sometimes they'll be like, we want to help the people or exploit their suffering, or for our own political reasons to condemn the Venezuelan government or condemn socialism, for example, as we see is going on with Cuba. But it seems like when you have economic failures in capitalist countries, nobody says capitalism is a failure. You know, you can have widespread poverty in Colombia. We can have displaced people from war, the drug war situation, resources being used to assassinate the Haitian president, which with no interest to the Colombian people, truly, and nobody tries to condemn that whole Colombian state. Actually, we give them more money, we ally with them, we support them, we'll prop them up. It seems like when other countries, usually anti-imperialist countries or socialist leaning, try to exert their sovereignty, it's like, no, throw the whole thing away, throw the whole thing out. It's all no good. Venezuela, everything has to go. Cuba, everything has to go. Syria, everything has to go. It can't be, there's no nuanced look when it comes to these certain countries that, you know, don't serve US interests, for example.
Yes, exactly. And that's why I also wanted to mention the internal displacement crisis
in
Colombia, yes. And for folks to like recognize, you know, how bad the situation is in Colombia and has been for a very long time. So this relationship with Venezuela is really interesting because people like to play one country off of the other, right? But exactly, like Colombia is not a beacon of democracy, of equality, of economic stability, or any of that, right?
Yes.
And of course, there's this factor of like drug war, and like a lot of it now, people start to mix the war on terror, war on drugs, and call it narco-terrorism, right? So everything gets blended up and even more complicated, and it's harder for people to really see what's going on from the outside because of the way the narrative is presented in the United States. But it's important to acknowledge that, you know, just like in the US, the Colombian government has its hands involved in the drug trade, right? It's a narco state, just like the US, right? And this is not like conspiracy theory, it's proven fact. It's an open secret in Venezuela. I mean, a lot of these ruling class politicians are married into narco syndicate families, right? It's well known. There's all these connections between Colombia and Mexico even. So yeah, a lot of these excuses for repression in Colombia or US intervention, you know, in Colombia as well, are bad faith arguments. Because you say, you know, they want to say, oh, we're here to stop the drug trade, but then you have like Mitch McConnell's family with a boatload of cocaine getting caught, or you have these ruling class politicians in Colombia getting caught being involved in the drug trade. So yeah, there's a lot of excuses that get thrown around for the sake to justify repression, but we know that the real reason is that they don't want to see this sort of change happen in Colombia that would lead to a freer, more just, more equitable society, because it is against you know, the domestic ruling class interest, and it's also against the interest of the international ruling class and the imperial powers of the world.
I mean, you know, we're discussing Venezuelans going into Colombia, but from my understanding, you grew up in Venezuela when you were younger. You spent some time out there.
Yes, I lived there twice actually.
What was
as
it
a
like?
kid.
What was it like at that time? I mean, obviously you were kids, you have different perspectives, not necessarily politically aware as much as, you know, we become as adults, but what was it like, you know, living in Venezuela those periods of time?
Like you're saying, I wasn't really fully aware of what was going on around me. I did grow up Like the second time I moved there was right as Chavez won his election in '99. So I was living there during the beginning of the Chavez government,
Okay.
during the CIA-backed coup against him, during the managerial strike, the oil strike, which was really a strike of like the people who run the factories and own the factories. It was not a workers' strike. But I did experience a lot of that stuff, you know, firsthand. Although I was still very privileged in my way of experiencing it because I was there, you know, not as a Venezuelan national, right? I was there as like someone internationally. But I did get to see a lot of this stuff firsthand, and my perspective on it has developed a lot as I got older. But you see that the U.S. intervention is very clear, and then it's very clear, like when when the ruling class is super excited to kick Chavez out, but then all the working classes and the poor come out to mobilize in a massive, genuine way. You kind of see like, okay, there's something going on here. There's a
There's
reason
more
why.
to the story. There's two sides to the story.
Exactly. Yes, and it's always way more complicated than it's presented in the United States to American audiences. No matter what the framing is, there's always way more going on than is really communicated. So it's really important to listen to folks on the ground.
Especially I mean, especially at that time when Chavez was very successful. He was helping the situation in the country because oil prices were high, and there was revenue to help people who needed the help, who were usually neglected by the state. For example, it's like the U.S. government doesn't care when a state neglects its people as long as it's in the name of capitalism. But once you neglect people in the name of socialism, or you can't provide in the name of socialism, all of a sudden we must do something right now. What you're saying is two sides of the story. Just in Cuba, it's the same thing. The media here will show us some protests of people who may have legitimate grievances against the Cuban government, for example, let's say, but then they won't show millions of those who support the Cuban revolution and support the Cuban government. Shouldn't we hear their opinion as well? Why are we picking and choosing whose voice should be priority and should be heard of more than the other, for example?
Yes, I do think that in the case of Cuba, one of the most important things when it comes to framing in the United States or in the West, more generally speaking, is the impact of the embargo, right? And the impact of like decades of intervention, not even just the embargo, but like all the assassination attempts, the Bay of Pigs invasion, right, which was an unsuccessful invasion from the U.S. government. CIA's planning and plotting of different ways to disrupt. I mean, they even made a plan to bomb Miami. CIA was talking about bombing Miami to destabilize. Exactly.
And blame it on Cuba. Yes.
And a lot of the same things happen with Venezuela when it comes to how we talk about Venezuela, of the story always conveniently misses the US influence when you hear it reported in the United States. That's always like a very convenient aspect of the narrative that is just magically missing when we talk about it, is what happens when you put people under a trade embargo forever. And that is an act of collective punishment, right? What they're doing is punishing the people in order to use that leverage against the government, right? To make the situation so dire that people act differently, right? In that situation, and they feel differently about the government and about the progress that has been made. So yeah, very, very difficult situation. People in the United States often get a very limited, very limited information about what's really going on the ground. And as far as like I'm concerned, the most important piece for people in the United States to understand is the role of U.S. intervention, is what these trade embargoes mean and what they look like, and not just like how it affects that individual country, but how it affects the whole world, the region, the geopolitical implications of this, because then it starts to complicate all these international relations between countries, because the trade embargo doesn't only prevent the US and these countries from trading, it can prevent these countries from trading with other countries that would otherwise have totally normal political relations, right? And
they may fear losing out, they may fear repercussions of trading with a country that the U.S. deems bad or in opposition to.
Exactly. And just like you said, meanwhile, all the time they're trading with Saudi Arabia, trading with extremely repressive governments. I mean, just monarchy,
Exactly.
straight up monarchy, straight up oppressive governments,
Dictatorships. Exactly. Yeah.
The role of the US in providing weapons to bomb Yemen, right? All these countries, right? Israel, right? So it's like, okay, you care about human rights when it's a weapon to use against people, but you don't care about human rights in a genuine way when it comes to like the US government.
Yeah, it's like they'll choke a country, destabilize it as much as possible, use allies within the country to destabilize as well, and then they'll be like, look, see how bad the situation is. Look how horrible the people are living, even though they played a role in it. But it's like, but at the same time, we need to bring up the embargo because people don't know the impact of it. What's really even from the left, like I'm looking for a list of things that are prevented from being traded in Cuba, for example. That'll be important visually and information wise. Like people are denied these basic necessities due to the embargo, for example. But I feel like also the left is not providing. I feel like we're bankrupt to an extent as well because we're not necessarily providing a solution either. We're like reactive. We're like, the imperialists are bad, the embargo's wrong, but then that's kind of where we end our discussion. We don't have a counterweight, whereas at one point, Cuba had the Soviet Union to lean on. It had Venezuela during Chavez to lean on, but now Venezuela has its own economic problems where it can't really assist the Cuban state. And then you have people on the ground where it's like, social justice now has become like a gimmicky Instagram thing. Anytime a group of people protest, people jump online and act like, solidarity, hey, yeah, stop this. This is wrong. But it seems like it's not based on understanding the situation clearly. It's more celebrity posting, free Cuba, SOS Cuba, without understanding the consequences if there's an overthrow of the Cuban government, for example, or without understanding that you may be indirectly working with people who want military intervention in Cuba, which is not good for the United States or good for Cuba, or not good for the world in general. It's like, how do we provide these answers? I feel like the people in Colombia are doing that with this general strike and demanding a change and trying to say, this can't go on any further. What does your organization, that you work with, the Red Condor Collective, what are they calling for in Colombia? What kind of work are they doing in Milwaukee, and bringing awareness on Colombia?
So thank you for asking, brother. So when it comes to like Milwaukee, I am the only member in my city of Red Condor Collective. We are kind of very spread out.
You're like a one-man army, my brother, like a one-man army.
Well, it's never just me, it's always, my community has always showed mad love and support for the Colombian people because Milwaukee is such an international community, huge immigrant population, huge refugee population, and people link up. And there's a history of people linking up and working together. So it's never that I'm a one-man army, but that people, when someone puts out a call and it's legitimate, people stand up with that, right? And I gotta shout out the Mexican community in Milwaukee for showing love. I gotta shout out the African American community for showing love. The Palestinian community, of course. But generally speaking about Red Condor, what we really focus on is making sure that people have good analysis of the situation. So we're trying to inform people. We're trying to make sure people can connect with organizations on the ground and that are in Colombia. We never position ourselves as like the one organization doing this work or the one that has the answer, the solution, the right analysis per se, but we're concerned with making sure we connect the dots to the diaspora, to the homeland. And then when it comes to like what people can do, we have our fundraisers, which allow people to donate directly to community organizations, like Congreso de los Pueblos. Yes.
Those funds go to people on the ground in Colombia doing the work?
Yes. So like, for example, like La Directa Media Collective, like Buenaventura Resiste in Buenaventura, right? Like El Congreso de los Pueblos, right? Lots of different street medic organizations, muralist organizations, right? We are able to use our platform as a diaspora organization, as like an English speaking organization primarily, right? To connect people with folks on the ground. So they can really like do something, right? Because it's one of the hardest things with all this stuff that you see on social media, in the news, is that you're just like, this is so horrible, but what can I do, right? And a lot of people don't always necessarily provide those action steps, right? And we like to focus on like material aid and like our material conditions and how we can change that, and how you know, by connecting with these organizations, you're also, you know, as a donor, you know, you're also yourself making a connection to the work that's being done, right? And it encourages people who make these donations to look further into what's happening, do their own research, right? Connect with other groups. And there's, you know, we're not the only ones doing these fundraisers. There aren't as many that are accessible like for Americans. But like if you're in Colombia, you're connected to Colombia, there's so many groups doing fundraisers locally. Okay. So like, let's say if someone has a Colombian bank account, if you're a Colombian citizen, it's a lot easier to connect to these groups directly. I've been kind of struggling to try to figure out how to make these direct donations, but I don't have a Colombian bank account. I'm not a Colombian citizen. So it's been a hard time, but that's why it's so great to provide these other platforms across the diaspora that are international, that allow people on a global scale to connect to this very local work in Colombia. And again, we're not just concerned with like one particular city or one particular type of organization. We are very broad-based. We look at the entire country. And this is something we've been doing before the Paro Nacional, supporting the movement for a significant amount of time. And for example, like this group Buenaventura Resiste, they did a local civic strike on the port. They're a port city, and we supported that strike. And we supported the organization in the aftermath of the strike as they, you know, they faced repression and threats. So when the Paro Nacional started, we were kind of positioned in a way of like, okay, we know how to do this. We've done it before. We have connections. But then it grew, of course, in a huge way, in a really beautiful way, to see all the people contributing financially, right? Every dollar counts. Every dollar is important. We're all working people. So we appreciate when people donate their money, because they're giving a part of like their time and their labor, right? And it's real. So we take that responsibility seriously. And what that means is that we take transparency seriously.
Of course, yes.
So we like to provide proof of what we're doing. A lot of times organizations will send us photos and videos of what they've done with our money, and we like to publish that and share that. If you go to our Instagram, those are the posts that say like, where's the GoFundMe money? Those posts are the ones that are kind of highlighting the work that these organizations do. Sometimes we get beautiful little beautiful graphics that they send us, you know, shouting us out. And I love to see that. It warms my heart. It puts a big smile on my face to see folks back home thanking us for being in touch and in support and actively contributing in a material way.
Helping people on the ground in a material way, exactly. You know, I was trying to address, like, some people think activism is an Instagram post, and not that anything is wrong with, you know, posting, trying to bring awareness, but it shouldn't be the end all be all or start and end with, you know, something posting online. You know, there is more that can be done. We'll definitely put a link to the fundraiser, you know, in this video on the bottom. Do you feel frustrated as a Colombian American that your message isn't necessarily heard as much due to Colombia being an ally of the United States? For example, I feel like if you were a Venezuelan American condemning the Venezuelan government, you may get more media spotlight. If you were a Cuban American condemning the Cuban government, people all of a sudden want to hear what you have to say. But, you know, you're condemning ally of the U.S. government, so it's like we don't want, you know, like, yeah, cool, I'm sure things are bad, but we don't want, you know, we don't want to make any real noise about it.
Right. You have a valid point. I don't necessarily feel like upset about it because it's something, again, it's not new. It's like kind of just how the US works when it comes to international relations. I think a great example of this is also what's happening in Brazil. People are rising up against Bolsonaro's fascist government over there, you know, and all over South America, people are hearing about it, and in certain networks online, you'll hear about it, but you're not seeing it in a big way in the U.S. media because Bolsonaro's government is very close to the American government. So yeah, I just kind of know what it is. I know how it's going to be, and I don't think about like our different struggles in different countries as like competing with each other in any sort of way. I think it's a global struggle for liberation, and that all of our struggles are intertwined, interconnected, and that none of us are free until all of us are free. And that's you know, that's why it was so important for me to reach out to the Palestinian community locally. When you saw a new wave of protests happening as a result of Israel attacking Palestine, the vicious bombing campaigns, eviction campaigns, everything that you saw in Silwan and Sheikh Jarrah. Apologize for my poor pronunciation,
No,
but
perfect,
everything that you see going on there, you know, you saw like the Palestinian community mobilize in a huge way immediately. You saw people who are allies or in solidarity mobilize with them. And my initial thought was not like, oh, the spotlight is moving, but it's like, okay, we're doing this together. We in it together. The only way we're gonna win is together. So let's link up in a genuine way, not a superficial way to take a photo and share, right? But
exactly.
to build in the long term, for even when the spotlight is gone altogether, right? When the hashtag that's trending is changing, our relationships remain, our political bonds remain, the work that we accomplished, the gains, they remain. So that gives us ground to move forward. So in Milwaukee, what that looked like is that we did a cultural solidarity event connecting the Colombian community with the Palestinian community, of course, with the support of the larger Milwaukee community, right? Nice. Especially the Mexican community came out in a big way, as they always have. So we did this event together to uplift our people, to celebrate our cultures, right? It was not that we were celebrating the moment, but we were celebrating our perseverance, our persistence. As you say, you know, existence is resistance, right? So we're celebrating the fact that we're still here, still struggling, and that we are building a relationship of struggle and a relationship of love and solidarity, and the commitment to each other's liberation, right? And this understanding that we only stand united, right? So it's been cool to see how that happened in Milwaukee. And I got to see that face to face, but it's also been cool to see it happening on the West Coast of the United States, in New York and the East Coast. Yes, that's done in a big way. Shout outs to Within Our Lifetime Palestine. Shout out to like Shaolin Rising and all the folks that have been working together.
Doing very important work. That solidarity work that you're talking about. Yes.
Shout outs to all those groups connecting the dots between our struggles. You know, holding hands and marching together towards the same objective. It's a beautiful thing. It's a powerful thing. It's so important. You know, and shout outs to the folks in London that are doing the same work. And all over the UK, you know, they had an action pretty early on where they marched from the Colombian embassy to the Israeli embassy in London. And that was like a moment for me. I was like, oh, wow, that's so real. Like we gotta be on the same thing, right? And I even had people in other cities reaching out to me asking, like, what is Red Condor doing? How can we work together? And I was like, okay, bet, let's move locally, let's do this. And you know, in my community, it was with folks from Students for Justice in Palestine, the Marquette campus organization, and the University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee organization, right? Two different universities in the city had different chapters coming together to work on it. Also, I have to shout out a group called Banana Banana, a local artist collective that did such a great job for this event, contributed so much, right? And of course, Al Gurba Dabka dance group.
Oh, nice. Okay. You're doing some dabke, Eric? We're seeing you doing some dabke.
I wish. I love it so much. I was the DJ, actually. I was DJing
Awesome. Hey,
the event. So I was behind the tables and just on the mic hosting.
Cool.
but yeah, just so great to see all these people coming, all of our communities coming together. And again, like I said, the Mexican community always comes out in a big way in Milwaukee, supporting Colombia. And I think it's important for us to really see our struggle as tied to each other.
Yes.
And I think it's been a unintended consequence of all this wave of repression that we're seeing all over the region and the world is unintended consequences, all these people coming together now. Because maybe at a different time, people would look at each other as like competition for the spotlight and attention. But nowadays, it's just like, we're in it together. Let's
Yeah,
go. Let's make it happen.
I didn't mean competition per se. I just felt that it wasn't, since you're condemning an ally, it's not, you want to sort of get that, that mainstream spotlight. But that's not what you're looking for anyway. My question could have been worded differently. You're looking for that grassroots connection. The Palestinian liberation, working with Mexican Americans who are speaking out, about what's going on back home. Filipino Americans, for example. There's so much, solidarity, within our lifetime is doing it. You guys in Milwaukee are doing it. SJP, Existence is Resistance. We're trying to build this international solidarity movement where we're not going to, Palestinians aren't going to liberate Colombia. Colombians aren't going to liberate Palestine. Every group is going to liberate themselves, but we can help along the way as much as possible and at least bring an awareness to it. So,
Yes, sir.
You're not catering to those people who are condemning Cuba and Venezuela, for example. You're not trying to cater to them. It's just interesting that if you were, we would hear more about what's going on if that was the case. But you're looking for that grassroots love and that grassroots solidarity, which I love, and I love what you're doing out there with doing Red Condor Collective and building that Palestinian, Colombian, Mexican, solidarity movement. What's next for? What do you think is next for the movement on the ground in Colombia, as well as Red Condor Collective here in the U.S.?
Thank you for asking. So one thing that I definitely want to highlight as we talk about moving forward is it's been interesting to see how the Colombian and American governments have used this opportunity with the protests happening in Cuba to denounce repression against the protest movement, right? Meanwhile, it's the most hypocritical thing, right? Meanwhile, like the U.S. runs an illegal torture center in Cuba, right? And the U.S. Right, and the U.S. just spent a year tear gassing and shooting people, locking them up for responding to racist police violence, responding to white supremacy, which is institutionalized in the country, right? And just like the Colombian government just spent the last 2 months murdering people in the streets, right? So it takes a lot of nerve to then be like, all right, but you guys need to be careful. And it goes into what you're saying as well about these dynamics around which countries are allies and which countries are deemed to be enemies. And yeah, it's a really interesting, complicated situation to see how people want to wave fingers when the U.S. is like the biggest military empire in the world, violating human rights on a daily basis, the ongoing colonialism and genocide of indigenous people locally, right? The prison system, right? So it's just crazy. The audacity, right? The caucasity of it all is just crazy. And then, so moving forward, in Colombia, we see right now the Asamblea Nacional Popular, the National Popular Assembly, which is a body constituting lots of different organizations that assemble together. They've been planning a gathering and like a sort of Congress for the 20th of July, which is coming up, which is the Colombian Independence Day. And they're trying to really bring all the local assemblies which have been popping up, these Asamblea Popular, these popular assemblies which have been popping up as a result of the protest movement. So they're trying to link everyone together to move forward and put together more proposals, put together action steps, strategize, right? And that has already been repressed by the Colombian government. There's been a lot of like people's movement is being impeded, whether they're coming in and out of the region where the assembly is gathering. So people are going to continue figuring out new ways to struggle. They're going to refine their tactics, refine their approach strategies, develop better relationships or you know, further deepen their relationships with other organizations. So I think that's kind of where I see things moving forward, is like a further connecting of the dots. And I think it's to the point right now where, you know, I believe the strike will continue until, you know, real substantial objective is achieved. Although, of course, the shooting down the original tax reform was a major accomplishment.
Definitely.
I think people aren't slowing down until they see something really, really impactful. But even if it did slow down for any reason, now we see this sort of infrastructure and network across the entire country and the diaspora, which is so interconnected and like mobilized and ready for action, that I think that in the long term, Colombia is going to be much better off. Our communities and diaspora are much better off because of the fact that we are all have been engaged in this struggle and have been mobilized to take action and participate. And you know, we're all developing internally. We're developing our organizations more, and then we're developing the way that we all interact and struggle together. So I don't necessarily have like one specific vision for what that's going to look like, but I see things further developing, getting deeper, getting more refined, right? Connecting all the dots, right? And of course, like in Milwaukee, one of the things that we're planning moving forward is another march, but this time a sort of a unity march between the Colombian and Latino communities, the Palestinian community, and Milwaukee's African American communities, all coming together, you know, openly, broadly saying that our liberation depends on each other, that we're coming to fight for each other, that you know, united we stand, divided we fall. So I think we're going to see it further moving in that direction, which means that our movements will only grow stronger because it'll be that much harder to divide us, right? And I think that a lot of these old divide and conquer tactics, which have worked before many times, I think these tactics are no longer working. And I think that a lot of like disinformation campaigns are no longer working. So I see us only becoming more sharper, more agile, and more powerful as we progress, whether we're talking like locally or internationally and globally.
That's beautiful, and I want to be hopeful and end it with a positive note. You know, it's just part of it. I feel now that the U.S. is kind of leaving the Middle East in a sense, leaving Afghanistan, not focusing on, not needing Saudi oil as much as before, that now they'll be able to target the Caribbean and Latin America more, unfortunately, whereas before they may have had a leeway due to the U.S. distraction, you know, and stretching thin in Afghanistan and Iraq, obviously, that it allowed the movements in South America to kind of expand and do its thing without as much as intervention as if the U.S. wasn't involved in Iraq and Afghanistan, for example. So that's my only fear, is that the U.S. is going to focus on South America again, and you know, the Caribbean, Central America, targeted if anything goes the way that it does not want it to go. But you know, people are on the ground working. It's a beautiful thing. Thank you so much, Eric, for, you know, telling us what's going on in Colombia. I hope more people learn about it and check out the work that you're doing. Before we close it out, where can people check you out online?
Check us out, Red Condor Collective on Instagram, YouTube, Twitter. Check out our website for Diaspora Tribune. Diaspora Tribune is our news outlet. So we provide a lot of like historical and political analysis to help give people that context that they need to really understand the situation in Colombia. Feel free to reach out to us and connect with us. We want to keep building with organizations and individuals that are genuinely committed to making this systemic change, which is necessary so that our people can be free and have live in a more equitable society that is healthy for our people, right? So reach out, connect with us, just like you have, brother. I want to say thank you so much for taking the time, to sharing your platform with us, and really making the effort to inform people about the situation, connect the dots between our struggles, bro. And I look forward to continue working with you and with all the organizations that have been reaching out to us. So let's keep it rolling. El paro no para, el paro sigue. Que viva el paro nacional, que viva la minga indígena, que viva la lucha, right? We're gonna make it happen, right? We are struggling for a better future for our people, the ones that are with us today, the ones that have passed away, and that we lost, right? And even the ones that are yet to come, right? So it's a beautiful thing, and of course there's lots of pain involved in this work as well, lots of trauma, but it is beautiful when people come together, linking arms and struggle, fighting together, and really making a genuine commitment towards these causes.
Thank you so much. Again, check out Red Condor Collective. Check out his personal page, Palante Siempre. He does amazing video work. Again, thank you, my brother. Existence is resistance from Colombia to Palestine. Thank you so much, Eric.
Thank you, brother.
Peace, my brother.
Un abrazo fuerte.